Hi everybody and welcome to episode 2. Last time I ran a script, I wasn't very comfortable with it, so I'm going a little more freeform. I've got a guide and we'll see how we go. So one of the things I talked about last time was swirling wine and why it was important. And I have another glass of wine I prepared here, and I'm going to do the same swirl because what am I doing? I'm going to swirl it and then I'm going to sniff it. Oh, that's actually quite nice. Well, I'll talk more about this wine later. I was looking forward to it. So why we do this is because wine itself is alcohol in water, but if that was just it, it'd be a clear, colorless, mostly flavorless liquid. The bits that we all like about, well, let's be honest, we do like the alcohol, but the other bits that we like about the wine are the chemicals that change how it looks, and the chemicals that change how it smells, and the chemicals that change how it tastes and how it reacts with our mouths. And all of that goes together to give you the wine experience. I did mention that there's a lot of processing that goes on in wine after it's been made to make it look like the wine we expect, because a wine that's just made is full of suspended dead yeast, it's full of bits and pieces of grape mass, it's cloudy, it's got a lot of stuff in there. It's not that it's undrinkable or poisonous, it's just that we're really not used to it. I actually miss it a bit, because of course I used to be a winemaker, and one of the most interesting things is trying wine that's literally just finished its fermentation, because you can see all these primary characters and it's great. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the chemicals and their importance, where they come from, and I'm also going to talk about show judging and wine rating, and then I'm going to taste a wine, and I hope that that's actually all going to be fun. Well, I'm going to enjoy it because I get to taste wine. Hooray, it's wine time. So let's start by looking at a wine fact. And the first wine fact that I really want to talk about is the fact that most grape flesh has no color. It's clear. And if you're drinking a red wine, you're going, hang on, where did all that color come from? And the answer is it came from the black or red skins of the grape itself. There are something like 3 or 4 grape varieties in the entire world that have pink flesh. All the rest of them, including all the major red wine making grapes, have got clear flesh. So what that means is all the color that you see in wine is coming from the skin, which means that we have to involve it in our winemaking process. So let's talk briefly about winemaking for red wines. Because what you've got to do is when you crush the grapes, we said we crush the grapes so we get the juice out. If you're making white wine, then even if you leave it with a little bit of contact with the skin to draw out some of those characters, you often get rid of them very quickly because you don't need to extract color or things like that. But for red wine, when you crush the grapes, you leave them in contact with their skins. So you've got this big fermenter, which is full of crushed grapes, which have been plucked off the stems, and they're crushed and they're all sitting there in this big mass. And the liquid is coming out and it's reacting with the yeast, and the juices, sugars are being turned into alcohols. But this whole time, the grape skins are soaking in this big mass of liquid. And there are 2 distinct phases for the way that things are extracted from the grape skins. Initially, when it's mostly water, a lot of color comes out. An enormous amount of the color, which is called an anthocyanin. That's actually the color compound, and that's what really gives grapes all of the wine, all of that beautiful color. And as we get further in the fermentation, we get more alcohol in the liquid, which is of course what we're after. The yeast are producing more alcohol, there's more alcohol, and that starts to extract some of the other characteristics like the tannins. And we'll talk a lot more about tannin. We're going to go on and on about tannin. But if you've ever drunk a wine from Spain called Rioja, it's made from Tempranillo grapes, but they are left to sit after fermentation for weeks. And what that means is during that really long process of just sitting there, they're extracting lots and lots of tannin from the grape skins and the grape seeds and all of those sorts of things, and the wine is becoming more and more tannic. Now, if you were to try a wine loaded with tannin, fresh tannin, it's astringent, it makes you and it reacts with everything. So the Spanish actually go to a lot of trouble to deal with this tannin, but it makes Rioja a very, very distinctive wine because it's got all this structure which they've wrangled into shape by aging in bottles and the use of oak and all sorts of things like that. But this is just how you make red wine. You crush the grapes, you leave the skins in contact with them while they ferment, and that's where you get your color. So this is why you can have Pinot Noir, which is a red grape, but it's quite often found in high quality champagne. So Pinot Noir Chardonnay, very, very common blend. The Pinot Noir is often crushed and then immediately removed from its skins. So there's almost no color transfer whatsoever. And that's how that winemaking works. So that's red wine winemaking, and that means that we can get beautiful things. This is a Brands-Lauer Coonawarra Cabernet. It's the Blocker, 2015. And again, I get no money for this. This is just a wine that I picked up because I like it. I thought it would be interesting. And what's interesting about this is when we do the look, it's actually got quite, I hope you can see this, it's got quite deep colors. And what that means is the color compounds that are in this are quite dense, and there's a lot of color in there. And this is this is what we'd like to see from a high quality Australian red wine of medium to heavy body. We'd like to see this deep color. So all this are the chemicals in this wine reacting with light. And that's what's giving us the impression of this deep color. How does this matter for something like wine show scoring? Well, I want to segue into this because we've got the look of the wine, we've got the smell of the wine, and we've got the taste of the wine. And ultimately, if I want to explain to you as a professional winemaker to another person, I want to explain to you what it is that's good about this wine. So ultimately, what I should do is tell you what it looks like, what it smells like, and what it tastes like. But that can be quite hard to convey in words. And so we often use numerical scales to do this. And you would have seen wines rated, that this is a 17.5 point wine at the Adelaide Wine Show, or this is a 94 point wine from James Halliday, or Dan Murphy's Guide. This is a 92 point wine. What does this all mean? I will come back to this because there's an awful lot of interesting data around this. But the first thing is all of these scales are much better understood as being ranking scales than absolute scales. They're what we call an ordinal scale, which allows to put things in order. So if somebody is ranking all the same wines and they say this one is a 95 and this one is a 90, then the biggest thing to take away from that person ranking them is the one from 95 to 90 met their requirements better than the 90. The 95 met their requirements better than the 90. That's what that says. Now, they may break that down, and in the show scoring system, which goes from 0 to 20, they allocate so many points for the look of it, and so many points for the nose, and so many points for what it tastes like. And they put that all together, and then they come up with a score. And those scores are then used to determine what kind of awards things get. But there are 20-point scales, there are 100-point scales. Which one's better? Well, it's a really interesting question, because when I was doing winemaking, the generally held opinion was that any wine that scored less than 12 out of 20 was not commercial grade, as in there was something faulty about it. So in reality, if you're sending a wine to show, you're going to expect that it's going to be pretty good. So really, our scale goes from 12 to 20. And then you get people who say things like, well, there is no such thing as a perfect wine, so there's no 20. And nobody gives 19.1. So suddenly what we've got is from 12.5 to 19.5 in 0.5 intervals. So we don't actually have a great deal of movement inside this scale. So when we're actually trying to assess the quality of a wine on a scale like this, we're going to get a lot of banding, where the wines are kind of falling into groups rather than being numerically distinct. Okay, you say, 20 points obviously isn't working for us. Let's do 100. Yeah, well, that works really well too, until you realize very few people will actually bother releasing a review on a wine that gets less than 80. Oh no, wait, it's the same problem. We're back from 80 to 100, and suddenly we're in a 20-point wine scale again. And we're going to see the same kind of issues, which is that in reality, very few wines are going to get that absolute top score, and very few wines are going to get that bottom score because people are going to edge away from it. And this is an example of what we call bias in ranking. And I'm not saying that the people who do this are deliberately trying to deceive you. They do a lot of work and randomization and all sorts of things to try and make sure that the rankings that they give are the best they possibly can. But it's an unavoidable issue when you do really, really large scale assessment that you're going to have what we call a centering bias, which is you're going to come back to the fact that anything that's worth tasting is going to be kind of sitting around the middle, and you're going to want excuses to rank it down or rank it up. And I'm going to put a graph up right now that shows you the number of ratings associated with each rating mark for 129,000 reviews. And look at that. We've got this beautiful looking curve with an unexpected dip around 89. And it doesn't matter who you go and look at. People who use a scale like this always end up with that dip around 89. Because if it's 89, people look at it again and go, oh, maybe it's better. Because there's actually a quality change in terms of the way that we describe the wine. We use a different word for it at 90 than we do at 89. So, oh, maybe it should be a 90, or maybe it's not good enough to be a 90. Maybe it's not good enough to be an 89, and it moves away. And this is clear evidence that despite people not collaborating, not doing this deliberately, they are naturally resistant to allocating this. So where does this leave you? Well, let me taste this wine, and I'll talk to you about it. So first of all, I'm going to look at it. Now, you notice I've got a white background here because my table is actually brown, and I want to be able to see the wine, and I'm leaning on its side so I can see its meniscus, which is the name for that really thin bit of fluid right at the edge. And this is a beautiful, beautiful red. It's a deep color. It's got some elements of black in there, so it's got some dark bits. It doesn't have very much purple. It's more red, bricky red sitting there. So it's about 5 years old. That's what I'd expect. The younger the wine is, normally the more vibrant the color. We'll talk about that in much more detail later. So that's a pretty good looking color. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to look, swirl, sniff, sip, and reflect. So let's do that. Time to do some words for this. Well, it's got a beautiful blackcurrant character. Now, you don't have to see blackcurrant, you can just say, dark red fruits, because they have a very distinctive smell to them. And there's also a sweetness in the nose. And that is actually, overall, it's a very pleasing smell. It's not candied. It's just on that sweeter fruit side. And I'm also picking up a kind of a minty note as well. Now, these are all things that I would expect to smell in a Cabernet. So I've got this beautiful color and I've got this pretty typical Cabernet nose. But do I get the same things in the mouth? That was aeration, by the way. Me drawing in the air over this wine that is warming in my mouth. So all the chemicals are coming up out of the liquid into the vapor, and then I draw them back through. And wow, that's a cracker. Yet more of that blackcurrant. It's really, really prevalent. It's just got a beautiful vanilla character that's coming in from the oak, and the mouthfeel is fantastic. It's not too harsh. It's not soft. The acid isn't too strong. The acid isn't too weak. And it's got a beautiful minty finish to it. I like that. You could also, a lot of people see violets in Coonawarra Cabernet, and I could certainly see an argument for something like that. But the reason I wanted to talk about this wine is it's accessible. This wine, if you go and pick it up from, Nick's Wine Merchant online, not me, another Nick, does some good stuff, it's $20 a bottle. And this wine has been rated really highly. I mean, for me, looking at it, I would say, look, this is great value for money, and it's a very enjoyable wine. And I probably wouldn't bother doing a score or something like that. But then you have a look and you realize that it's been given 94 by the James Halliday Wine Companion, which is not a rating to be sneezed at. And, Nick's Wine Merchant, they do their own scoring. They've given it a 95. It's got a show gong from somewhere, which, means it's probably, it's been presented well. And I think that's a great way to think about it. We were tasting wine, we were having fun, but if you want to recreate this tasting, you're not going to have to spend $50, $60 a bottle. You can spend 20 to 25, have something with dinner, and you can go through the whole process, and you can find your own chemicals in here. You can find your own tastes and flavors and come up with your own vocabulary. Because what you want to do is to work out what it is you like so you can get more of it. And if you can align what you think of to the words other people use, then you can go, actually, I like that. So my recommendation is that maybe you go and find a bottle of the Brandslera blockers from somewhere, obviously keeping your social distancing up, and you give it a try with the people in your household. You see what it's like. You see if you saw what I saw. You might see something totally different. You might say, Nick, you're full of rubbish. Yeah, well, you can say it in the privacy of your own home because I can't hear you. But obviously feedback is very welcome. The other thing I wanted to mention from last week was the wine that I actually used, which was a Goldings, the local Sauvignon Blanc from 2018. And the reason I'm mentioning Goldings is because, well, I tried the Sauvignon Blanc last week and it was very pleasant. And the other reason was because they're one of those hills wineries that were affected by fire. And I've actually been purchasing an amount of wine from there to try and support those people. And we'll be trying a lot more of their wine throughout this series. So looking, more than enough of me talking. I hope it's been interesting. I hope you found out a lot of stuff you didn't necessarily know. And more importantly, I hope I've convinced you that wine tasting is going to be fun and it's not going to break the bank. All right, everybody. Salut. Well, thank you very much for watching. Please remember that wine is best enjoyed in moderation. We're all a little stressed right now, but if you think you need help or someone to talk to, maybe put down the wine glass and get in touch with one of these great groups of people who are on the screen right now. Look after yourself, stay well, and I'll see you next time.